Guys, before we begin, I just wanted to thank you for subscribing and watching this video and staying tuned and studying with me. We've reached 18 subscribers. I'm so happy. I was so stoked when we got to 2 digits. And yeah, I'm also some people have been commenting on the videos as well, and they say it's been helping them out. That's been awesome. I've been having a lot of fun and learning so much and so motivated to study and making these videos, and it's so awesome to see that not only that but it also helps you guys. So thank you very much, and let's keep going, and we're gonna ace these exams together. Let's go. Welcome back, everyone. Let's finish the test today. Are you guys excited? Only 10 left. Question 41. You have an Azure Synapse Analytics dedicated SQL pool that contains a table named Table1. You have files that are ingested and loaded into an Azure Data Lake Storage Gen 2 container named Container1. You plan to insert data from files in Container1 into Table1 and transform the data. Each row of data in the files will produce one row in the serving layer of Table1. You need to ensure that when the source data files are loaded to Container1, the date time is stored as an additional column in Table1. So the suggested solution is, in an Azure Synapse Analytics pipeline, you use a date flow that contains a derived column transformation. Does this meet the goal? So date time, for that, you don't have to, I don't think you use date flow. Instead, you use get metadata activity. So the answer to this is no. Question 42. So the same question, right? Yeah, the same question but different suggested solution. You use a dedicated SQL pool to create an external table that has a additional datetime column. Yeah, so I feel like this suggested solution is moving even further away from the last suggested solution. Yeah, like creating an external table doesn't make sense. So no. This exact same question again, and says the suggested solution now is you use an Azure Synapse Analytics serverless SQL pool to create an external table that has an additional datetime column. Maybe I'm missing something here, but this will be a no as well. I guess we'll find out at the end. You have an Azure, question 44. You have an Azure subscription that is linked to a hybrid Azure Active Directory tenant. The subscription contains an Azure Synapse Analytics SQL pool named Pool1. You need to recommend an authentication solution for Pool1. The solution must support multi-factor authentication and database level authentication. Which authentication solution or solutions should you include in the recommendation? To answer, select the appropriate options in the answer area. Note, each correct selection is worth. Okay. So, multi-factor authentication. So that's done through Azure AD, Azure Active Directory authentication. So we know the first answer to that. Database level authentication. That's done through contained database users. So the first answer there. Yeah, this is one of those things that I just kind of know off by heart, I guess. Kind of memorized that. Azure AD authentication. The first part I learned it from AZ900, the Microsoft Fundamental Certificate. Have you guys done that course? Have you guys? I mean that certificate. Yeah, I set that one for free. If you guys know how to do that, might make a video about that soon. But next question, question 45. You have an Azure Data Factory. You need to ensure that pipeline run data is retained for 120 days. The solution must ensure that you can query the data by using the custom query language. which 4 actions should you perform in sequence? So you need to ensure the pipeline run data is retained for 120 days. Okay. Cool, cool. So the first thing you do, let's see the actions. Select the pipeline runs category, create a log analytics workspace that has data retention set to 120 days, stream to an Azure event hub. Create an Azure storage account that has a lifecycle policy. From the Azure portal, add a diagnostic setting. Send the data to a log analytics workspace. Select the trigger runs category. Okay, so you start by, what do you start by again? I think you start by, from the Azure portal, you add a diagnostic setting, and you create a log analytics workspace that has data retention set to 120 days. Oh, sorry. You start by creating a log analytics workspace that has data retention set to 120 days. And then you select the pipeline. Oh, sorry. And then I'll summarize at the end. I'm just kind of talking to myself here. So you create log analytics workspace. And then you from the Azure portal add a diagnostic setting, select the pipeline runs category, and send the data to a log analytics workspace, I'm pretty sure. Yeah, so that's that one there. Question 46. You have an Azure Active Directory tenant that contains a security group named Group 1. You have an Azure Synapse Analytics SQL pool named DW1 that contains a schema named Schema1. You need to grant Group 1 read-only permissions to all the tables and views in Schema1. The solution must use the principle of least privilege. Which 3 actions should you perform in sequence? Okay. So Group 1, DW1, and Schema1. Group 1, read-only permissions, Schema1. Cool. So the actions are create a database role named role1 and grant role1. Select permissions to Schema1. Create a database role named role1 and grant role1. Select permissions to DW1. So we're only interested in giving permissions to Schema1, so we can rule the second one out already. Assign the Azure role-based access control reader role for DW1 to Group 1. Create a user in DW1 that represents Group 1 and uses the from external provider clause. Assign role 1 to Group 1 database user. So the 3 steps are, you first create a database user in DW1 that represents Group 1, and then you create a database role named role1, which has the permission that we want, and then we assign role1 to Group 1 database user. So the first one there. Question 47. You are designing an enterprise data warehouse in Azure Synapse Analytics that will contain a table named customers. customers will contain credit card information. You need to recommend a solution to provide salespeople with the ability to view all the entries in customers. The solution must prevent all the salespeople from viewing or inferring the credit card information. So this comes down to either data masking or column level security, right? So with the data masking, it's just like as it suggests, as it says in the name, you're masking the data. So like for example, like maybe you get the first few digits of it is replaced with X's or something, but but you can still infer with the data, and technically you can still view it, but it's just that what you're viewing isn't the actual data. So this one here is column level security. Question 48. You have an Azure subscription that contains an Azure Data Lake storage account. The storage account contains a data lake named Data Lake 1. You plan to use an Azure Data Factory to ingest data from a folder in Data Lake 1, transform the data, and land the data in another folder. You need to ensure that the Data Factory can read and write data from any folder in the Data Lake 1 file system. The solution must meet the following requirements: minimize the risk of unauthorized user access, use the principle of least privilege, minimize maintenance effort. How should you configure access to the storage account for the Data Factory? Yeah, so definitely like when it comes to security, that's like probably my weakest area right now. So the question is, how should you configure access to the storage account for the Data Factory? Data Lake storage account. Every time I see Data Lake storage account, it's always to do with shared access signature. So I know that the first one is gonna be shared access signature. Use that to authenticate by using a managed identity, I think. Oh, that's not it. Um, Yeah, I'm not 100% sure about this. How should you configure access to the storage account for the Data Factory? For the Data Factory. I wonder if it's a shared key and a managed identity. I'll go with that for now, but we'll definitely come back to that one. Question 48. You're designing an Azure Synapse Analytics dedicated SQL pool. Groups will have access to sensitive data in the pool as shown in the following table. So there are 3 tables given there with some information. You're designing dynamic data masking to maintain compliance. For each of the following statements, select yes if the statement is true, otherwise select no. Okay, cool. So the first statement says, analysts in region A require dynamic data masking rules for patients region A. So analysts, their access is, in the top table it says, analyst has access to in-region sensitive data. And so since in the statement we're looking at region A, analysts in region A for the data in region A, so we don't need any dynamic data masking rules. So there will be a no for the first statement. Second statement says, engineers in region C require a dynamic data masking rule for patients region A, height. So engineers access in the top table says access to all numeric sensitive data. And height is a numeric data. So yeah, we don't need a dynamic data masking for that either. Engineers in region B require a dynamic data masking rule for patients region B height. again, engineers have access to all numeric sensitive data, so we don't need dynamic data masking for that either. So it would be a no, no, no. Question 50. Last question, guys. You have an Azure Synapse Analytics SQL pool named pool1 on a logical Microsoft SQL server named server1. You need to implement transparent data encryption on pool1 by using a customer key named key1. Which 5 actions should you perform in sequence? To answer, move the appropriate actions from the list of actions to the... Okay, cool. So this question is about knowing the steps for implementing TDE, right? Yeah, again, like data security and things is probably my weakest spot right now. So bear with me, but the actions are enable TDE on pool 1. So I think a lot of these questions, like, you can just think intuitively. Enable TDE on pool 1 is like our final goal, so this is probably our final step. Assign a managed identity to server 1. Configure key 1 as the TDE protector for server 1. Add key 1 to the Azure Key Vault. Create an Azure Key Vault and grant the managed identities permissions to the Key Vault. Okay, so we know that enable TDE on pool 1 is going to be the last one. What's going to be the first one? I'm thinking assign a managed identity to server 1, because if you look at the other ones, it's all to do with keys, and we can see that you can't configure a key before adding a key. So first step, assign a managed identity to server 1, and then I imagine create an Azure Key Vault and grant the managed identity permissions to the Key Vault, and then configure key, and then it's the remaining 2 steps, the configure one and the add. Configure key 1 as the TDE protector. I imagine add key 1 to the Azure Key Vault first, and then configure key 1. So the steps should be, if I just say the first word for each box, it will be assign, create, add, configure, enable. Assign, create, add, configure, enable. So here we go, the first one. So I'm gonna finish the test and let's see our mark. So we got 2 wrong. So let's see all questions marked for review. Incorrect questions. Okay, so we got this one wrong, where the suggested solution was in an Azure Synapse Analytics pipeline, you use a data flow that contains a derived column transformation. Oh, yeah. Okay, so derived column transformation to generate new columns in your data flow or to modify existing fields. So I think probably the most typical way to go about doing this is get metadata activity, but there's no reason that this doesn't solve the issue as well. So fair enough. And the one that we got wrong was 48. That's good. So this one says Azure Active Directory and a managed identity. So on Azure, managed identities eliminate the need for developers having to manage credentials by providing an identity for the Azure resource in Azure AD and using it to obtain Azure AD tokens. A managed identity. A data factory can be associated with a managed identity for Azure resources. Okay, so a managed identity can help data factory link with other resources, because the question was is about using Azure Data Factory to ingest data from a folder in Data Lake 1, and you link them by using managed identity. And since you need to managed access, manage credentials by providing identity for the Azure resources. Okay, so you use managed identity. So you use Azure AD to authenticate by using a managed identity. So okay. Okay. Learning something new today. But that's it, guys. We've done all 50 questions. Um, Next we'll do is practice test 4, which I've done, and I just failed, but I was doing the question in a hurry, so I made a lot of mistakes. Well, that's my excuse anyway. So we'll probably go through them together. Hope you enjoyed this, and see you in the next one. Thanks.